There are few, if any, franchises and fan bases quite like those of Star Wars. Built over 40 plus years, Star Wars fans are some of the most passionate out there, and are very protective over the movies and TV shows they love. Yet if there are any decisions they don't agree with or mistakes made in the galaxy far, far away, they will be exposed. And in all honesty, Star Wars is a franchise simply littered with canonical contradictions, questionable production and story decisions, and downright basic plot holes. Any of these will always be found and highlighted by fans, but on occasion there have been those mistakes that have been admitted to by those that actually made them too. So with that in mind, I am Gareth from What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 Star Wars mistakes confirmed by the creators. Number 10, no test screening, Star Wars The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson, even outside of Star Wars, has typically never seemed to be put off by outside opinions on his work. He has stated previously that he does not agree with giving fans exactly what he thinks will make them happy, with the end result of that method usually leading to the opposite. And he became somewhat infamous within the Star Wars fandom when The Last Jedi released, with Episode 8 being by far the most divisive movie yet. The only regret from the process that Johnson does have is that there was no test screening allowed. Generally, the director wouldn't indulge in such things, and with the potential for spoilers leaking greater than ever, Lucasfilm holds a very similar policy. However, on this occasion, Rian Johnson would have loved to get some feedback on his controversial movie. It's unclear what, if any, changes he would have made had this been the case, though the feedback would have almost certainly strongly suggested certain potential amendments. The Last Jedi could have been very different indeed. Number 9, there was no real plan, the sequel trilogy. After the original trilogy earned itself the reputation as one of the defining movie trilogies in cinematic history, the prequel trilogy 2 decades later couldn't have been received much worse. Underwhelming would have been an understatement, until fans were given a new perspective on episodes 1 to 3 by how poor the sequels were. Simply put, there is likely no shortage of regrets in hindsight, something that J.J. Abrams sums up pretty well in just one enveloping regret of poor planning. The director helmed The Force Awakens before sitting out The Last Jedi and returning for The Rise of Skywalker. Through the Rian Johnson sandwich that became this trilogy, it was obvious that there was no overarching plan from the start, and the movie suffered for it. Abrams admitted to the disconnect between the 3 films, as a lack of planning meant that no one knew what they were setting up next. This was why so many threads that were left dangling at the end of Episode 7 were essentially ignored or retconned in Episode 8, before Episode 9 did much the same thing to its own predecessor. What a mess. Number 8, a disjointed ending, Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Though many years later there has seemingly been an upturn in the defense of The Phantom Menace and the entire prequel trilogy, by and large it is still one of the worst received Star Wars movies there is. The pro column, which essentially consisted of Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson, was vastly outweighed in the con column thanks to the likes of Anakin Skywalker, a narrative surrounding trade taxation, and of course the lightning rod for much Star Wars hate that is Jar Jar Binks. Even George Lucas himself wasn't happy with the final product, though this was generally aimed towards its disjointed conclusion. As told in a documentary surrounding the making of the movie, the final moments just jumped around too much and the fans' negative reactions were understandable, undermining the potentially emotional scene of saying goodbye to Qui-Gon Jinn were the goofy antics of Jar Jar and Anakin, and the largely underwhelming Battle of Naboo. By the time this was realised, however, it was too late to make any real changes to the final cut. Number 7, incorrect grammar, Star Wars The Force Awakens. There are some entries on this list that have really irritated Star Wars fans, in some cases for decades. Then there's this entry, which is admittedly a rather inconsequential mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. This came within the very first moments of one of the most anticipated movies of the century, with the opening crawl of The Force Awakens. It's not a massively noticeable error, particularly with the adrenaline and excitement that comes with the opening of any Star Wars movie, but there is a grammatical error when telling of Leia's brother Luke. The comma before Luke is necessary as it renders the name as non-essential information, meaning the sentence would make sense without it. The fact there is no comma suggests that the word Luke is essential information. The only potential reason for this would be if there was another brother that Luke needed to be differentiated from. Of course, this was never the case, and J.J. Abrams eventually confirmed that this was indeed a mistake and took full responsibility, and so he should. Number 6. Killing off Val Solo, a Star Wars story. Though Solo, a Star Wars story's narrative naturally revolved around one of the most popular characters in Star Wars history, an entirely new cast of characters save for one particular Wookiee, and a surprising Sith Lord appearance had to be introduced. One of the key players was Han's mentor of sorts, Tobias Beckett, as well as his crew. The likes of Val and Rio didn't last too long, as their deaths essentially left Beckett, Solo, and Chewie on their own to face Dryden Voss. It all made sense within the narrative, and you could argue that Val needed to die to kickstart the rest of the story, but that doesn't mean that writer Jon Kasdan does not regret it. Played by the incredible Thandua Newton, Val made a heroic sacrifice so that her love could live on to steal the valuable coaxium. According to the writer, the actor was so compelling in the role that it posed the problem of wanting to see more of her. This is a regret shared by Newton herself, though for different reasons. The Westworld actor wasn't upset Val was killed off because of her own want to return to the franchise. It was the fact that hers was the first major Star Wars role for a black woman, and it ended in her unceremonious death. Not a good look. Number 5. The death of Stila Guerrera, The Clone Wars. Set between the events of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, The Clone Wars allowed for a far deeper exploration of previously unseen characters and unheard stories across the galaxy. One such character was Saw Gerrera, already created from the mind of George Lucas. The man behind the entire Star Wars franchise also brought to life Stila Guerrera, a sister to Saw who would help develop the character, and also act as something of a thorn in Ahsoka's side when it came to her relationship with Lux. While Saw would go on to appear in The Bad Batch, after his live-action debut in Rogue One of course, Stila died during the Battle of Onderon, in the same story arc in which she was introduced. This is something that Dave Filoni has admitted he deeply regrets. With Stila, Filoni felt the series had a character that they could bring back later in a different capacity. She was a popular character in the writer's room, her design and characterization were excellent, as well as a fantastic vocal performance by Dawn Leon Gardner, but she still just didn't make it. Number 4. The corny dialogue, Star Wars Attack of the Clones. As a sequel to The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones didn't particularly fare any better with how it was received. Though several years had passed between the movies, and Anakin Skywalker grew to be played by Hayden Christensen, fans were still as unimpressed with his performance as they were with Jake Lloyd. In fairness, the script in parts didn't exactly leave the young actor with much of a chance, did it? There is a particular scene that is still ridiculed today, between Anakin and Padme on Naboo, you know the one. This comes after they have shared a kiss, as Anakin pours his heart out to the woman he has loved since he was 10 years old, and knew her for a few days or so. The delivery isn't great, but it's hard to imagine any actor taking the words given to him by George Lucas and making them sound in any way good. The writer-director himself has since described the dialogue as pretty corny, which in the opinion of most would still be considered far too generous. Number 3. One glaring plot hole, Solo, a Star Wars story. It's an unfortunate truth that if you look hard enough at any story, particularly one brought to life on the big screen, plot holes will inevitably be found. It's less common, however, for a plot hole to be pointed out by the writer of the story itself. This is exactly what happened with Solo, a Star Wars story though. There was plenty to critique within this particular Star Wars outing, sure, but there is one plot hole in particular that will forever haunt writer Jonathan Kasdan. After Tobias and Han returned to Dryden without the coaxium they promised, the leader of Crimson Dawn was willing to kill them until they came up with a plan to steal more from Kessel. Dryden took some convincing to sign off on this plan, as he didn't want any ties back to him or Crimson Dawn to start something of a war with the Pikes. Han's observation that no one knew he and Beckett were working for Dryden was a smart one. However, the plot hole still resented by the writer is why the villain got Kira involved at all. His most trusted companion was sent to be the most visible part of the heist on Kessel, something that could have instantly tied him to the job and kick-started the war he so eagerly wanted to avoid. Number 2. Releasing 2 movies too close together, Star Wars The Last Jedi and Solo, a Star Wars story. It's fair to say that Star Wars has, as well as the Marvel Cinematic Universe in recent years, fallen victim to oversaturation of product. Throughout the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, there was just one new Star Wars movie every 3 years, leaving long enough for fans to be chomping at the bits for more by the time of the next release. With the sequel trilogy, however, this was ramped up to a Skywalker saga movie every 2 years. Even in between 2015's The Force Awakens and 2017's The Last Jedi, there was Rogue One. But this still didn't deter fans, as told by the respective box office numbers of $2 billion, $1.3 billion, and $1 billion. Lucasfilm seemingly wanted to push things even further, however, and potentially push their luck a little bit too much. Just 5 months after the release of Episode 8 came Solo, which saw a dramatic drop in its box office intake. At just $392,000, this is still the lowest grossing Star Wars movie ever. There were plenty of reasons for this, but the one that Kathleen Kennedy gives the most credence to is the fact that it came too soon after Episode 8, leading her to take her foot off the gas in regards to cinematic releases. Number 1. Leia hugged Rey, Star Wars The Force Awakens. In 2015, Star Wars The Force Awakens reintroduced the franchise to the big screen for the first time since 2005. And even with so many new characters and storylines to introduce, the movie still found room for the original big three of Han Solo, Leia Organa, and Luke Skywalker. One of the biggest moments in the entire movie was of course the death of Han Solo at the hands of his son, Ben. Such was the gravity of the moment, Leia felt it herself from across the galaxy and was deeply hurt. Then when the Resistance, including Solo's best friend Chewie, and newest acquaintances Rey and Finn returned to their base, there was a moment that confused Star Wars fans everywhere. After the death of Han Solo, his best friend and his love offered each other no comfort whatsoever, instead simply walking past each other with zero acknowledgement, allowing Leia to go straight to Rey instead. This was something who Leia had never met before, and who barely knew Han, yet still she chose to hug her instead of Chewbacca. J.J. Abrams has since explained that the point of the scene was for the two Force-sensitive characters to find each other through their powers, but also admitted that ignoring Chewie was a mistake. That is one way of putting it. The poor big furry lad. And that's our list of any other Star Wars mistakes confirmed by the creators. Then let us know all about them in the comment section right down below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're at it. Also, if you really like this kind of thing, then please head on over to whatculture.com and find some more fantastic articles just like the one this video you're watching right this second is based on. I've been Gareth from What Culture Star Wars. May the Force be with your lovely self as always. I hope to see your face very, very soon, but in the meantime, just be good to yourself. Bye bye!